Joining me on the stage right now is the brilliant Sophia Hudson from Kirkland and Ellis, who is a partner at Kirkland in their capital markets group. And I am so excited to have her join the conversation here to shed some insight and to talk about this a little bit. Like, how do we hack into that system? And I know, Sophia, you had such a great insight about, how to, just a great example of exactly how we can start to, change things from the inside out. And I would love to turn the stage over to you to hear about it.
Great, thanks, Breen. Hi, everyone, and how inspiring is Sally Project? I wish we had an audience where we could just all clap and cheer. So it's great to be here. Yeah, I mean, I do think that talking about women's access to money and power in our next panel about governance and access to power, I think is one of the keys to unlock to achieve that more fairer and kinder society that Sally mentioned, that I think is going to inspire me for the foreseeable future. I think, obviously with our audience today, we're talking a lot about private companies and venture-backed companies, and the statistic you just quoted with the 7% women on boards is for the private VC-backed community. And I think there's a spectrum of, private all the way to public, and we'll talk about that a little bit today in terms of types of corporate boards, how diverse they are, and what are the constituents that are helping facilitate a shift to more diverse boards, both in terms of gender and diversity. One thing that I've seen in my industry, the legal industry, which is private, but has a lot of public company clients as well as private company clients, is an external constituency that's telling us we need to be more diverse, both in terms of gender and in terms of ethnicity. A large group of general counsels, including general counsels at some of the largest companies in the world, multinationals, as well as significant domestic companies, came together and said, we are going to require our external law firms to be diverse, to put diverse lawyers on their teams, and not just the incoming first years, because, when they first come out of law school, classes are quite diverse, but also all the way up the ranks. We want to see diversity at all levels, and we're going to make you accountable. We're not going to just have you, put pretty slides together for a pitch, but at the end of the year, we want a report of all of the hours of the matters that you worked for us this year, and the hours of the diverse attorneys, and what their gender and ethnic profile are, and are they getting promoted over time? And that's a huge motivator. No one wants to lose a client, and they certainly don't want to lose a client for something that is within their control to work on. And it's been amazing because you've seen law firm leaders really, really focus on not just ensuring that their recruiting teams are recruiting incoming associates that are diverse, but also holding their partners accountable for ensuring that they are mentoring and sponsoring and giving opportunities to have that client time, to become the principal with clients, to take over those clients if they're eligible for promotion. We still have dismal numbers, statistics. I think only 15% of women equity partners in my peer group are women, and the statistic is even lower for diverse attorneys. But we are laying the groundwork to, I think, have a much more diverse set of people who are in the governing bodies of these firms. And it also, once you have these imperatives from clients, it gives individual people who make hiring decisions that much more cover to ensure that they're making the right choices. So, for example, in my group alone, we are now 66% women and 50% ethnically diverse. And I think that's so important because, as Sally mentioned, there are all of these, systemic inequities and messages that women get. And I feel like if we're going to get to 50% partnership that's female, we have to start with a higher number than 50% because, what just an employer can't combat all of the other messages that women face, telling them they shouldn't work that hard or shouldn't, take time off or do other things that may make it difficult for them to get promoted on the same track.
Right, I love that. And this example, it just strikes so close to home for so many of us at the fourth floor and who are here on the call. Actually, many of us are part of the Women's General Counsel Network, which I do think was pretty instrumental in circulating the letter that got to those law firms that, started this ripple effect that, you just described so well, Sophia. So thank you so much for bringing that up. And also, I'm not sure if I said this initially when Sophia joined me on stage, but she will be the moderator of this next panel. And she, aside from advising companies on complex financing transactions, as well as corporate governance and securities compliance, she also advises on ESG efforts, shareholder engagement on such topics as board and workplace diversity, equity, and inclusion. So very, very on point. So now at this point, without a moment more, let me share my screen and let me hand it over. Let me just share the screen so everyone sees the panelists, and then I will sign off and leave this to you, Sophia.
Great, thank you.
Thank you and welcome everyone, and goodbye.
Okay, I'm trying to see if we can see everyone. Great, we've got. Oh, perfect. Okay, great. Everyone's on now. Hi, everyone. Good to see you again. So yes, I'm Sophia Hudson. I'm going to be your moderator for this panel. And I thought, luckily, Breen just gave me a nice introduction, but I thought I would hand it over to each of you to in turn introduce yourselves as you would like to do so. So Juliet, could I ask you to go first, please?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Sophia, and hi, everyone. Firstly, thanks so much for having me today, and loved hearing Sally and her always inspirational words. I'm Juliette Scott-Croxford, CEO at Worth Media. We are an event and content platform for a successful, influential, and affluent audience. And one of our key platforms and communities is Women in Worth, which is all around how do we activate and accelerate progress for women and minorities amid the challenges that we still face, whether it's access to the board, access to capital, access to funding, investment, equity and pay. So this is a topic after my own heart, and thrilled to be here. We do an array of events and content, and have recently gone, through a significant transformation from what we were, which was a print magazine, to a multi-channel platform.
Lucinda, would you like to go next?
Sure. So I'm Lucinda Duncalfe, and I'm founder and CEO of a new company called Above Board. I am a serial entrepreneur. I did my first company in 1996 and have had a wide array of all venture-backed companies since then. Above Board is really special. It's an inclusive platform for board and executive hiring. So if you think about the topics here, we're the last mile. You're ready, you want to be connected with boards, you come on to Above Board, free for members, and you will see right now we have 560 opportunities for executive and board roles. So it's really about that action of how do we, all the talk, all the training is awesome, and it's all precedes what we do, which is actually help put women and underrepresented minorities on boards and in the executive suite.
Great, thanks. And we'll get back to talking more about that in a few minutes. Cherie, would you like to introduce yourself now?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Today has been amazing. Thank you to the fourth floor, all the co-founders and all the ladies today. It's been such a wonderful event. I'm excited for our launch of the new platform. So again, I'm Cherie Aimée. I speak to the heart and soul of both ethical leaders and humanity. I've got TV experience, media experience, and I advise founders, executives, and entrepreneurs on very unique perspectives of leadership and ethical business for the future of humanity, essentially assisting innovative leaders in maintaining balance and focus in their original why, which I think came up earlier in the conversation today. We've talked about some of the struggles and challenges of being an entrepreneur, looking for, or being a founder of a startup and looking for funding, and just some of the struggles of being a woman in business in general. And sometimes along that journey, we've kind of forget about our original why, you know, and it's very easy to kind of get sidetracked just to try to keep up with the industry. So I really speak to that visionary, that future leader, that's where we're going as a society, as a humanity. I'm the founder of AAI, which stands for Authentic Awareness Initiative, which is very new. It's something that I've created after being in technology for 20 years, and more recently being in both the blockchain space, fintech, and specifically data ethics. And it was really diving down this rabbit hole of data ethics and exploring, well, what is data ethics and what does that mean? And what I came to the conclusion myself was that the topic of data ethics is very, very broad. It could mean cybersecurity, it could mean privacy, it can mean freedom of speech. It's really exploring this broad aspect of data and how it affects humanity. So socioeconomic level, psychology, culture, politics, how it's really impacting us. And that basically became the foundation for me building this company, which really studies how leaders can use various tools to increase their conscious awareness as we grow into this ever expanding digital age, which I feel is so key in a world that is going to require compassion and empathy, which will be at the forefront of an expanding digital age. So when we talk about automation, robotics, machine learning, we want humans being human, right?
Absolutely.
Right. And so I want to share, I'm also a cancer survivor, near-death survivor, heart transplant survivor. I know what it's like to be disabled. So I'm also, I don't really identify as that, but I am a disabled warrior. You can't tell by looking at me, but I've been through a lot. I lost my business when I was in a coma for 4 months fighting for my life. And my experiences really just showed me what it's like to have your reality shattered, like we all have been thanks to COVID, but bounce back stronger than ever using creativity, knowledge, and wisdom. And I just spent the last few years really advising other startups and leaders in these spaces such as blockchain, fintech, and AI and data ethics, and really advising from this higher level perspective of how it's impacting humanity.
Well, that's great. And I know that that speaks to so many of our audience members in so many levels. So thank you for being here. Thank you all for being here. Juliet, I wanted to kick it off. I think we'll speak to all three of you on this topic, but I wanted to kind of set the stage in terms of, grounding us in governance and thinking about what are the trends that you're seeing from your vantage point, Juliet, in terms of access to power and the importance of diversity?
Yeah, I think we're seeing a lot of trends, and there's been some significant things that have happened in the last sort of 6 to 12 months. The way that we think about this is around policy, parity, and pipeline. And certainly when it comes to diversity at the board level and the importance of diversity at the board level, we've seen some policy changes such as NASDAQ's announcement to propose that there is a woman or a person of color on all of the NASDAQ boards by a certain time. So I think there is some great sort of policy movements that are forcing change. That said, I think there's also a sort of necessary overall culture of diversity and inclusion that's really required so that this policy change doesn't just become a tick box and you're not suddenly just the only on a board. I think quotas work to a certain extent, but I think the really important thing as a leader is embracing a culture of inclusion and diversity and really understanding that diversity leads to better outcomes, and it's not just about the right thing to do, but it leads to better outcomes in terms of diversity of thought, it's better for the bottom line, it's better for creativity, it's better for productivity. So I would say there is clearly some policy changes which are positive and are clearly needed given the devastating impact and the number of women that we saw leave the workforce last year. But I think there has to be more of a notion of leaders walking the talk when it comes to implementing and really sort of thinking about how do you embrace a culture of diversity and inclusion throughout your entire organization.
Yeah, absolutely. Cherie, in your work advising companies, is that something that you're being brought in to talk about with the leaders of the firm in terms of taking a more inclusive approach to their overall company culture?
Specifically, not yet. So the work that I was doing with startups and founders at the time was more being brought on to help with whether it was funding or communications. So what I'm doing right now is more of the research work that I've just completed to help move forward. And so that is my plan moving forward, to absolutely 100% help with that aspect of the board, a board, the business culture. And I know we've talked a lot about, these policies being put in place and having to have accountability as a leader, that you're not just talking the talk, but you're also walking the walk. You are hiring, you are advancing, women and women of color. You are making sure that they feel included and understood in the workplace. There's a lot of work and there's a lot of unlearning that needs to happen. And so where this idea of authentic awareness is coming from is my own kind of beta test last summer to really get a diverse group of people in a room and discuss these type of topics, and to really create a safe environment to see what came up through them. And from that, I really was able to extrapolate that data and come up with some really key methods to help expand people's awareness to these changes. So it's one thing to create a policy change, but you also don't want people creating a policy change that they're like fighting against, or even like in their heads, they are rebelling against, right? So maybe you can't see it, but they are internally rebelling at such a drastic change in their life. So that's really the area that I want to work on, is helping to really bring that balance back to all parties. And this isn't just for, non-people of color that are leaders. There are people of color that are now having to get used to walking into an environment where people are also kind of a little shaky, like, am I doing this right?
Yep, that's fair. That's fair.
So that's where I focus.
Lucinda, I think that you started your company because you saw demand, right? You saw that companies were striving for, and that there was a need for what you provide. Maybe you could talk a little bit about the demand side of the equation, and give us some context for what you were seeing that led you to go into this space.
Sure. So there were really two threads that came together. And Sophia, one was exactly what you identified, that we were seeing demand. Now, that doesn't obviate any of the things Juliet or Cherie said about how you actually then form inclusion, right? I think that there are many companies and clients of ours who very genuinely want to diversify their board. That doesn't mean they yet know what to do with that once it happens. But to focus on the demand side, and maybe talk a little bit about the actual nuts and bolts, and you should absolutely sign up for the workshop about this, fourth floor's workshop. What we were looking at, I was working with True Search, which is a very well-known, their 7th largest search firm. And what I came to understand about how people are placed on large boards or in executive positions today is there are really only, as a hiring company or a company that's looking for a board member, only two ways that it's done. Either they're hiring a retained executive search firm, right? Which, if people don't know, the fee there's about a third of compensation, tends to be very expensive. And if they're not doing that, the only other option in the market is to do it yourself. The aha moment came, and so there's a market opportunity there, right? Forget diversity and everything else. There's a market opportunity for other options to provide to companies, in particular early stage companies that really need to grow a team and can't afford the search fees. So we were looking at that. And then the aha realization was, wait a second, both of those approaches, retained executive search or doing it oneself, leverage existing networks. The way I've been in that boardroom, I've been on 13 boards. When you're in that boardroom, what happens is you all sit there and go, who do we know? That's how it works. And because those rooms are homogenous, the networks are homogenous, and there's no way for the rest of us to get in on the game, right? So if you do a little exercise, for example, and look at African Americans on boards in the Fortune 500, there's this tiny number who are on 4 or 5 boards, and they just get passed around, right? So the genesis of the idea was, oh, hey, we could completely upend this $21 billion industry and truly level the playing field for access by creating a new model. And so the only reason that that's going to work today, and we're out of the blocks super strong, so we're very convinced it's going to work, is because of what you said, Sophia. There is indeed this genuine interest. And as Juliet said, some of it is driven by legislation. They have to. There's also a lot, harkening back to our keynote, there's a lot of power in the purse that women have. And companies are starting to get that, like, oh, 70% of our consumers are women and we have one on the board. Maybe that's not actually smart for optics, if nothing else. So we started to see that tilt happen 2-3 years ago. And then George Floyd's murder absolutely accelerated it. And it changed it from really just being women. So diversity at the board level really meant women mostly. That changed that whole conversation. And so we have seen, it was already a hot topic, and we have just seen it explode in terms of demand.
Lucinda, I couldn't agree with you more on the do-it-yourself piece, because that's what I've seen. And Worth's chairman, Jim McCann, sits on a lot of public and private boards, and he's sort of been coming to me to say, look, you've got this pipeline through Women and Worth, and I'm saying we do, and there's a lot of board ready, incredible leaders through this pipeline, but they're just not getting access or visibility to these opportunities. And they're all demonstrating the fact that they want to have board experience. And he, a lot of it is like, oh, your mate asks you, who do you know, or can you come on? And it just circles and circles around the same people. And I think that's what we've got to break. And I think recognizing that do it yourself, to your point, is tapping into an existing network. It's not widening, it's critical.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So it sounds like, Juliet, you're seeing some of what's driving this change in some of your conversations with individuals who are trying to have more diverse, whether it's boards or C-suites in terms of governance. How do you see that developing? What do you think are the forces that are bringing that to be, and how sort of sustained do you think they are?
Yeah, I mean, clearly the quotas are forcing the question. And I think prior to that, I think perhaps some boards just didn't see it, or didn't want to see it. And I do think there is an education piece there around that. But I think being able to demonstrate that there are skills and capabilities that you're lacking, or your business will be better off with having a more diversity of thought and diversity of experience and background at the board level, it is going to be the clear thing. And I think, I mean, even the countries, this is even on a global level, the countries that have instituted quotas average a much larger number of women on their boards. unsurprisingly, given that that's a legal requirement. But 8 of the 18 countries averaging 3 or more women have quotas or regulations in place requiring the hiring of women. And Switzerland is the most recent example of that. So I do think that quotas are one clear path, but I don't think they're the only clear path. And there's a lot of leaders that I'm now seeing, both men and women, that really are starting to understand the benefit of this beyond it sort of being a sort of a tick box, I guess. But, you know, I think that there's another piece to this, which is sort of where the executive search firms come in, which is sort of the qualification. And actually, particularly for public boards, is, you know, there is a sort of certain level of certification you're going to need. And I know the NACD do this, which is, you know, you need some kind of validation that you're board ready. And how do we support women and minorities through that process to ensure that, you know, when they're coming on, it actually, they're set up for success on both sides.
Absolutely.
Yeah, one
Absolutely.
thing I would add to that we're seeing from our members is there first of all, programs, absolutely, and I'd start with the fourth floors. There's also a ladder you can climb. So start as an advisor to a smaller company, then become a board member for a small private company, then you can get a venture-backed company, then a private equity-backed company, and eventually you build both the skill set and the resume that gets you there. I often talk to women in particular who are a little bit, honestly, unrealistic. You're not just going to come from sort of being a VP level somewhere and jump onto a Fortune 100 board. That's not going to happen. You have to build towards it in the same way you build towards anything else in your career. And you have to learn the governance side, et cetera. At that public company level, there's a substantial responsibility there, and you need the chops for it, and you need to understand the risk.
I do think you make a good point. I think private equity is a very good entry point. Unlike the VC world, private equity, their investors are the pension funds and the pools of money that care a lot about governance. And so they get commitments from their investees, the private equity firms, that they will be diverse and have diversity and inclusion as one of their key goals. And so they're constantly looking for diverse candidates to put on the boards of their portfolio companies. And that really is a stepping stone, because so often those companies do go public, and then suddenly you're on a public company board and you're, you know, eligible to be on other public company boards. So I think that's a very good entry point. I guess I'm curious, well, maybe I can set the stage a second. In my world, which is principally with companies going public or already public companies, there's been a significant movement over the last 5 to 8 years to have boards be more diverse. And it goes far beyond what Goldman requires in terms of having one woman on the board, or what NASDAQ has proposed. You know, it's, when I say far beyond, we're talking 33 to 40% diverse, not, you know, over 50%. But it's been going on a while. And what has, I think, really been driving that change is the money. The large mutual funds that have index funds are really permanent capital. 20 to 30% of public companies, you know, of a public company shareholder base these days are index funds. And as such, it's a situation where the fund isn't going to pull its money out. It has to keep its money invested in these companies. And so it's going, when it thinks about governance decisions, it wants the companies to be successful in the long run. And the mutual funds have read all of the papers. They understand the benefits of diversity and inclusion. And so this is a key aspect of what they want their public companies to do. And so they've been lobbying them in sort of a private ordering system through shareholder proposals and voting on directors to make those boards more diverse, both with respect to gender, and obviously it's been an increased focus on ethnic diversity starting last year. And I think that, you know, we still haven't seen that flow down through the companies. It's wonderful, as we've all said, to have a diverse board, but what is the actual impact more than just having an individual or two on the board? And what we're seeing now is an increased focus on actual workforce diversity. public companies are getting increasingly pressured to disclose how diverse their workforce is and to track and disclose how they are promoting through their system diverse employees. And so that's kind of been something that's a cultural shift, I'd say, in sort of corporate culture over the last few years. And you see Larry Fink of BlackRock, who's very vocal and also influential on these topics, just released his annual letter this morning. And in that, he called out, he spent, several sentences discussing how he wants companies to have a plan for having a more diverse workforce going forward and to disclose how they are going to accomplish that. So when you see the money talking about that, the corporations, often listen, which I think is, important in this context. But I'm curious if any of you have seen that. How can we make that translate, or what could possible ways for that to translate into the private company, the VC-backed company, where so many of our participants are situated?
I think you can't get away from the fact that women are poised to inherit a large share of the 30 trillion that will be passed down from baby boomers over the next decade. So I think from a sort of financial point of view, there's a huge wealth transfer that is taking place and going to take place. So corporations have to ready themselves for that. And I also think there's something about companies needing to emulate who their customer base is. And we know that when you look at that sort of pipeline, a huge amount of women and minorities, particularly women, fall out at that middle management layer. So I think it's interesting when thinking about, well, who is your target customer? The wealth transfer of women, and then also we can vote with our wallets. So there's a number of forces at play that I think beyond the quota are forcing companies to think differently about, well, how are you representative of your customer base? Because you're going to have a much better chance of connecting with your customer base and growing as a business if you are. So I just think there's an interesting thing for brands to think about in that context. And I think, if the exercise of sharing that data forces you to kind of rethink, then I think it's only a good thing. As long as you take action.
Yeah.
I'd love to speak on that. We've been talking a lot about quotas and the data surrounding, having more representation on boards and in businesses. And I just want to I'm always going to bring back the conversation back to this understanding that we are all human, and no matter what the color of our skin or our identity, we are very unique individuals. And one of the reasons why I do study data ethics is to also uncover where some of the biases are unfolding within data ethics. So I always like to be a part of conversations like this. Even though I don't talk about it from a numbers perspective, I always need to interject and just remind people that we are dealing with humans here. We're dealing with people with personalities, with different socioeconomic backgrounds. So when we're talking about placing women on boards, or just in general affecting women of color within some of these business cultures, there has to be more studies and more participation. You need more of us, I'll say, in your companies, in your business, to give you this perspective, because I can guarantee you that I am not the same representation of an African-American woman from every African-American woman in the United States alone. I have a very different background. I have a very different education. Right? I have a very different environment that I grew up in. And so when we start talking about quotas and having to bring in other representation, it's really off-putting. I know it's necessary, obviously, as a business person, but it feels okay, and not necessarily to me, because I'm used to this and I've been in these environments my whole life, right? But to anybody that may be listening, that may be new to being or wanting to be a part of a board, they're not so used to this discussion of being talked about in terms of data and quotas and all of that. So you're kind of seeing, and this is nothing, against anything anybody said. I want to just show this is the need for that diversity, right? We need women to be coming to this table with all different perspectives so that all of us with these different backgrounds can relate to the conversation, can feel like they're being represented, can feel like they're being heard. Because I've met many, many people that are very educated, they're in tech, they understand all of that, and would not fit in your normal corporate or new startup environment because of where they've come from. So maybe they're educated in AI and they can talk about fintech and blockchain, but once you get in that culture, they're like, I'm still not being represented, right? So there's so many factors involved in this transition. And one of the areas that I really like to be a part of is being a part of that conversation and a part of these companies, bringing people in and just remembering that just because our skin color is the same does not mean that we have identical beliefs. It does not mean that we have similar education structures. And it certainly does not mean that we are all comfortable being around a certain dynamic of people. Right. And
Absolutely.
So,
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. And I think, hopefully one of the benefits of having more women and people of color in positions of power is that they can feel empowered to share their own views, their own perspectives, and actually express their true diversity, and hopefully then influence their institutions accordingly. I
right.
guess.
And you mentioned a key part that I just want to point out again,
Sure.
is that you mentioned hopefully, and I think that's the part that I really want to impact. It's the hopefully part, right?
Yeah.
Hopefully we will be able to make it work. And that's the piece really I want to share with everyone that is missing in all of this. Otherwise, you're going to get the same type of person of color in every company, and it's not going to be diverse. So I'll leave it at that.
No, I think that's kind of what Lucinda's getting at with her breaking of the networks, right, Lucinda?
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the future features we really want is sort of a Glassdoor rating by our members about companies and the truth of their inclusivity. I think about this actually, as I was listening to Cherie, she's really right. And I connected with it less in my current role and more thinking about myself, right? So I joined my first corporate board. I was 32. This is tech in the mid 90s. I've been once on another with a corporate board with another woman. So I'm always the one in the room. And I think that there have always been the one in the room. Hopefully that's different from here forward. And I think there's a real reality about why it was me in that room along some of the lines of what Cherie was talking about, right? I fit really well if you're looking at those checkbox things on your resume. And I was a jock growing up and a tomboy, and I'm very comfortable in this very rough kind of atmosphere, which a lot of corporate boards are, right? There can be a very, not in an antagonistic way, but it's intense. The responsibility is large, and the disagreements are about big things, and they're usually completely subjective. And so can you be in that, how can you be in that room? It's a question for yourself, right? How can I be in that room and be authentically me and add value by interacting with what's there? And so the truth is, there's some movement on both sides. And so I think there's a real self-awareness. One of the things that I see happen sometimes is, as women, we tend, and it's funny, there was sort of a Q&A thing happening online here that's related to this. We're worried about sort of what our, right, have we gone to the right, do we have the right credentials? Do we know exactly how to do this and all this? And then we enter the room and we're sort of reticent because we're figuring it out, right? And we're being empathetic, we're sensing everybody else. And the reality is, a lot of times what's required to be effective in that room is coming in kind of like a guy would, right? You're going to come in with strength. You're going to come in willing to say what you're going to come willing, right? Say what you think, be wrong, right? Rough it up a little bit. It's not personal. And so I think when you're entering that as an individual, when you're deciding we want to do this, it's like, do you really want to do that? I worry a little bit that it's become like the sexy thing to be on a board. It's not it's not for everybody, right? Either the specific work involved, because it's very high level, it's not usually very tangible, and B, it requires a certain way of you molding into the culture of the board. Yes, you're going to change that as well, but you're not going to change it by coming in and blowing it up. That's going to be ineffective. So I think it's a fascinating whole world. And as we see more and more diversity on boards, as we see the metrics click up, which Cherie's completely right? That's sort of some little angle of people. But as we see it, we will get also, I think you'll tend to see more diversity in other ways too. I think there's a whole thing about how does that happen, right? How do we actually help those boards and those individuals be successful? It's a fascinating question.
And I think to add to that, and to Cherie's point that we are all different. So if you are the only on a board and you're the only woman or the only person of color, there's a danger that you're going to be the one that they see representing that entire universe. And so I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing if you're going in consciously knowing that they're trying to fill a quota, as long as we can then play a part in pulling others up with us. And okay, if we are the only woman or the only person of color, who else can we bring along with us to broaden that out?
Absolutely. And I think, that's, as going back to my introductory remarks, having the ability to have, the being in a position of power in my own organization, having the ability to make the hiring decisions so that my group is 66% women and 50% diverse. And so my deal teams are all women, right? So there's not like, you're not the only woman in the room anymore. And seeing that, the women can all have their own perspective, their own style. Some of them are going to be like Lucinda describes, others are going to wait until people can't come up with a solution and then be the one who has the common sense solution that she says, not in a brash voice, but just in the one, and everyone's like, oh wait, we're going to listen to what she says every time. Others are going to connect more emotionally to people through the chit chat between sessions. So I do think that there's value in having as many women and diverse candidates in the room. And I think that hopefully that, bringing authentic voice will change the organizations, make society that kinder, more fair society that Sally talked about. I want to thank each one of you for being part of our discussion today. I thought your perspectives were so brilliant and your points very, very well made. I wish each of you the best of luck because you are all doing amazing things. And I hope to follow you in the future and see where you go with your endeavors. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. That was fun. Thank you.
Hi, everyone.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Sophia, for moderating such a powerful panel. And thank you, Cherie and Juliet and Lucinda for joining and providing all of your thoughts.